In the year 2063, humanity's poor treatment of the planet caused sea levels to rise so drastically that most of the Earth was submerged. Only 2 continents remained, and they were locked in a fierce war over the scarce resources left behind, located in the vast ocean between them. In this ocean stood a military outpost known as the Sentinel, guarded by 4 soldiers tasked with surveillance and reconnaissance. However, their morale was deteriorating daily. Their food supplies had run out, leaving them to scavenge from the trash, and they constantly argued over whose turn it was to cook or provide food. Their only hope was a monthly supply drop from a relief team, which was supposed to arrive once a month. Despite their 3-month expired military service, they were still stranded, eagerly awaiting the relief team that had yet to arrive. Supplies were dwindling, and tensions were rising. On one particularly stormy night, Cassidy and Sullivan decided to try fishing. Luck was on their side, and they caught a decent haul with their net. Meanwhile, Commander Hendrik noticed the storm dispersing and ordered Benz to check on the massive explosives mounted on the outpost's raft. Suddenly, the raging waves began destroying the outpost's pipelines. Benz rushed to repair them but injured his hand in the chaos. He struggled underwater until he finally broke free. Outside, the storm swept away the fishing net, and Cassidy and Sullivan lost all their hard-earned catch. Sullivan attempted to fish again but was forced back inside as the wind grew stronger. Just in time, everyone returned indoors before a massive wave crashed into the outpost, shaking the structure and flooding the entrances. Despite the damage, the outpost held firm. The next morning, the team discussed how to conserve their remaining resources while eating their standard military breakfast. Benz, frustrated, asked what happened to the fish. When he learned they had lost it, Sullivan quickly accused him of taking pieces from the kitchen to fix the pipes. The situation escalated, but Benz interjected, urging everyone to act like adults and focus on repairing the damage. Benz then questioned why they couldn't request the relief team to come sooner, but Hendrik explained that the telegraph could only be used for critical alerts. Later, Sullivan filed the daily report, stating there were no new incidents. The base responded with the same routine message as always. After a long wait, Sullivan joined Hendrik outside and spotted a ship approaching in the distance through binoculars. Cassidy confirmed it on the radar, and Sullivan, hopeful, thought it might be the relief team. However, Hendrik warned caution and instructed Benz to gather weapons in case the ship was hostile. Cassidy tried to communicate with the ship but received no response. Hendrik decided to play it safe and handed Sullivan a pistol, sending him in a small boat to investigate up close. As Sullivan approached, he called out for any passengers but received no reply. Once aboard, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The ship was covered in dust, the radio was off, and untouched food remained in the cupboards. Hendrik tried to contact Sullivan for updates, but Sullivan ignored the call. Upon finding 4 packed bags, he realized this was their missing relief team. Sullivan understood something terrible had happened to them, and their chance to return home was lost. Back at the outpost, Hendrik feared Sullivan might have been attacked and decided to destroy the approaching ship. He asked Cassidy for one of the detonator keys, justifying it as protocol. When she hesitated, Hendrik prepared to activate the explosives himself and called out to Sullivan one last time before making a decision. Sullivan finally responded, halting the attack just in time. However, when Cassidy asked for her key back, Hendrik refused, saying he would keep both keys as punishment for her hesitation. Later, Sullivan towed the ship closer to the outpost, and Hendrik began inspecting it. Meanwhile, Sullivan and Cassidy spent some time together to relieve the tension after the ordeal. After a few hours, Benz informed the team about everything he salvaged from the ship. He confirmed it was their supply vessel, noting the engine had been broken for months. Sullivan wanted to send a message to the base, but Hendrik refused, insisting they needed more information since none of this made sense even if it were an accident. The team grew increasingly frustrated with Hendrik's authoritarian behavior, especially when they realized he now held both detonator keys. After a shower, Hendrik returned to studying the ship's navigation logs, transcribing coordinates, and plotting them on a map. At the same time, Cassidy and Sullivan discussed what might exist beyond their isolated world, as they hadn't seen it in 2 years. Sullivan revealed he had secretly sent a message without Hendricks' knowledge. Later, the three gathered suspiciously around the telegraph. Benz confessed the truth. Hendrick had been yelling at them, but the device rang, and the base responded. Excited at first, they soon realized it was merely a repeated transmission of Sullivan's previous night's report. They now understood they had lost contact with the base long ago and that the system was simply replaying Sullivan's daily, no incidents, message. Meanwhile, Hendrick continued working on the coordinates, while Benz began sneaking onto the ship to execute a plan in his mind. On one of the nights, Sullivan caught him returning, but Benz refused to explain his plan. Eventually, they sat together, drinking and talking. Benz spoke about his family, expressing his desire to return home if he still had one. Suddenly, Benz revealed he could repair the ship. Sullivan was thrilled at the idea of escape and invited Cassidy to join him, promising a life together in one of the few remaining safe cities. However, Cassidy hesitated, unconvinced by his words. The next day, Sullivan sneaked onto the ship with Benz and completed the engine repairs. When they emerged, they found Hendrick waiting for them. He ordered them to dismantle the ship for spare parts to repair the outpost, but they refused. Hendrick insisted it was their duty. Sullivan argued he wasn't willing to die here like those before him, and Benz agreed. But Cassidy showed no support for their plan. Hendrick commanded them to return to the repairs and threatened them with his gun if they disobeyed. The men grew increasingly fearful of Hendrick's escalating aggression. Cassidy volunteered to speak with him, assuring him she understood his frustration over losing his previous team. She emphasized that leaving didn't mean death, it was an opportunity for success. Meanwhile, Sullivan and Benz began doubting whether they could confront their commander to secure their freedom. Their discussion was interrupted when Hendrick entered and admitted he had been persuaded by Cassidy's arguments. Without active communication, he declared someone had to return to the base, 2 would stay, and 2 would leave. As expected, Hendrick insisted on staying, and Cassidy volunteered to remain with him. Benz was relieved by this outcome, but Sullivan's heart broke because he was deeply attached to Cassidy. Later, Sullivan privately pleaded with Cassidy to reconsider and join him, even offering to take Benz's place or stay behind himself. Cassidy, losing patience, told him she didn't love him and saw him as nothing more than a practical necessity. Heartbroken again, Sullivan stormed out, leaving Cassidy in tears. That night, Sullivan and Benz focused on packing. Hendrick gave Sullivan a message to deliver to the base and noted their enemies were also soldiers defending their homes. Sullivan encouraged Hendrick to consider leaving with them, but Hendrick refused, insisting someone had to stay and guard the explosives. Hendrick returned to finish plotting the coordinates but discovered something shocking: the relief ship had deliberately drifted away from the outpost. Hendrick grew suspicious and went to Cassidy but didn't reveal his fears. The next morning, the team was startled by an alarm as another ship appeared on the radar. Cassidy's attempts to communicate went unanswered. Hendrick ordered the team to fire immediately, but the first shot missed. As they prepared to reload, Cassidy noticed their repaired ship drifting away. By the time Sullivan and Benz saw it through the dissipating fog, it was too late. When Cassidy arrived to warn them, precious seconds had passed. Hendrick, determined, struck Benz with his gun. Hendrick had sabotaged their ship, and when Benz refused to destroy it, Hendrick aimed and fired. A flour sack hit Hendrick's ear, momentarily distracting him. Finally, Sullivan took control and destroyed their ship to prevent further loss of life. An enraged Benz confronted Hendrick, but Cassidy quickly intervened, hitting Benz with a fire extinguisher. Sullivan and Cassidy then locked Hendrick in the storage room, with Cassidy holding both detonator keys. Benz, drunk and emotional, tried to confront Hendrick but accidentally struck Sullivan instead. Cassidy calmed Benz with her reassuring words, but he retreated to drink alone. Later, Cassidy told Sullivan they had no choice but to scan all channels for a working signal. She seized the opportunity to confess her harsh words were meant to push him away without guilt. However, Sullivan remained hesitant to forgive her. In the afternoon, Sullivan brought food to Hendrik and asked why he couldn't bring himself to leave. Hendrik revealed he had learned from the coordinates that the relief ship had been there months ago but was deliberately redirected. This meant there was a traitor among them seeking the explosives. Though unconvinced, Sullivan locked Hendrik up again. Sullivan spent hours sending distress signals while Benz, drunk and agitated, destroyed his workshop. Later, Cassidy showed Sullivan a childhood photo and admitted her family had been killed by the enemy when she was young. The next morning, a drunken Benz found Cassidy in the communications room and lunged at her in a disturbing moment. She defended herself, unaware he had taken the keys. Cassidy searched for Sullivan, but before she could explain, Benz appeared, ranting about activating the explosives. Sullivan and Cassidy tried to stop him, but Benz escaped. After Cassidy retrieved the keys, Benz admitted he had forgotten the final digit of the activation code. Sullivan suggested releasing Hendrik, but Benz delivered shocking news: they found Hendrik dead, having apparently taken his own life through the open storage hatch. Sullivan and Cassidy were devastated by the truth. While grieving, Sullivan read Hendrik's message to the base and was surprised to find he had requested an extension of his mission. Later, Cassidy showed Sullivan the workshop, where Benz had been fixing things, assuring him Benz was coping. Benz shared his tragic story about his wife's pregnancy, helping Sullivan forgive his earlier actions. Benz hugged Sullivan and left to retrieve supplies from the sea with Cassidy, who took a pistol from Sullivan for protection and thanked him. Later, Sullivan tried fishing but instead pulled up Hendrik's body, noticing a wound on his head, an undeniable sign of betrayal. Sullivan reviewed his comrade's files while Cassidy kept watch from the boat. Benz had a plan. Sullivan studied Hendrik's map and realized the lighthouse could move. At that moment, a storm began gathering, indicating someone had taken the lighthouse onto the ship and altered its course, redirecting the relief ship instead of guiding it to the outpost as per the coordinates. This person had eliminated the relief team and left the ship adrift. Hours later, Cassidy returned alone from the short trip, claiming Benz had accidentally fallen while retrieving plastic and died. Sullivan suspected she was behind it all and had been the traitor all along, but was too afraid to confront her. The next morning, Cassidy woke up alone. Sullivan spoke to her only via the radio, accusing her of killing everyone and being a spy for the enemy, and declaring she wouldn't get the explosives. Cassidy realized her keys were missing and went to the communications room, where she found Sullivan attempting to activate the explosives. Realizing there was no hope, Sullivan was ready to destroy the outpost with them inside. He pointed his gun at Cassidy, who tried to explain she regretted deceiving him and that her homeland was suffering. Sullivan didn't believe her and began activating the explosives. Instead of exploding, the device displayed a strange phrase Benz used to say, revealing he had programmed it to prevent destructive use. In the end, Sullivan and Cassidy spoke honestly with each other. Regardless of who would win, they agreed to defend the outpost to the last moment and continue surviving together. This is the end of the film. Until the next summary, thank you for watching.